Fox 59's Bianca Reyes is live in the newsroom now with more on these new articles of impeachment.
Good morning, Zach. Yeah, Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives are calling on President Trump to resign immediately, but if he doesn't, they could move to impeach him as soon as Monday. They accuse President Trump of abuse of power, saying his statements at a pro-Trump rally encouraged Wednesday's attack on Capitol Hill.
Donald Trump is absolutely collapsing right now as court defiance has sparked a brand new impeachment firestorm in Congress. And what's happening represents a fundamental test of whether there's any real check left on presidential power. Legal watchdogs are saying Trump's administration is ignoring multiple federal court orders, and they're using that alleged defiance as fresh ammunition to push new impeachment articles on Capitol Hill. Judges cannot literally order impeachment, but by documenting how Trump's team withholds billions in aid and blocks testimony in direct violation of rulings, they're handing impeachment advocates a ready-made case that Trump is placing himself above the law. The group Free Speech for People, through its Impeach Trump Again campaign, just announced new grounds for impeachment proceedings based on Trump officials repeatedly refusing to comply with federal court orders. And their statement lists specific examples that are damning in their specificity. The administration allegedly held back $2 billion in foreign aid in defiance of multiple court rulings. Officials ignored injunctions against freezing federal assistance. They refused to produce Office of Personnel Management Acting Director Charles Eisel for in-person testimony by a judge's March 13, 2025 deadline in a mass termination case. This is systematic contempt for the judiciary. But real quick, before we get into this, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built John Brown Show to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. And seriously, check right now if you're actually subscribed to this channel, because you might think you are but aren't. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get into what's actually happening here. The pattern that legal watchdogs are describing is not an isolated incident. This is systematic contempt for the judiciary. This is a deliberate strategy of treating court orders as suggestions rather than binding legal requirements. And House Resolution 353, introduced April 28, 2025, formally impeaches Trump on 7 articles, including obstruction of justice and tyranny. The resolution explicitly cites conduct such as acting in contempt of court for violating a court-sanctioned settlement agreement and undermining the powers of Article 3 courts. Now let me bring the receipts on what makes the tyranny charge so significant, because this isn't typical legal terminology. Tyranny is constitutional and historical language that evokes the founding generation's concerns about executive overreach. The framers designed separation of powers specifically to prevent tyranny, to ensure no single branch could dominate the others. By using the word tyranny, the resolution is arguing that Trump's conduct represents exactly what the founders feared. The language is designed to frame impeachment as constitutional necessity rather than partisan attack. Now let me show you what happened with the December vote, because this reveals the political complexity of the impeachment push. The House voted 237 to 140 to table Representative Al Green's separate impeachment resolution. That means the resolution was killed, at least for now. But here's what's significant. 140 members voted against tabling. 140 members wanted impeachment to proceed. And then there were the 47 Democrats who voted present rather than taking a clear position. The present votes reveal a visible split inside the Democratic Party over whether to move now on impeachment. Despite mounting claims that Trump is ignoring court authority, some Democrats want to impeach immediately. Others worry about political backlash or strategic timing. The division means that despite documented court defiance, the political will for impeachment remains uncertain. And here's what creates the dynamic that makes this story so significant. The tension between judges documenting non-compliance and lawmakers dodging an impeachment showdown. The more judges say Trump is defying them, the more pressure builds on Congress to act. Court orders become de facto impeachment fuel. Not because courts can order impeachment, but because documented defiance provides the evidence that impeachment advocates need to make their case. Now, let me walk you through the specific examples of court defiance because the details matter. The $2 billion in foreign aid that the administration allegedly held back in defiance of court orders represents one of the most concrete examples. Courts ruled that the administration could not freeze the aid. The administration froze it anyway. The defiance was not ambiguous or subject to interpretation. Court said, "Release the money." The administration did not release the money. The gap between order and compliance was documented and undeniable. This example provides exactly the kind of clear-cut defiance that impeachment advocates need to make their case. And the Charles Eisel testimony deadline that the administration missed illustrates how the defiance extends to judicial process itself. A judge ordered that Eisel, the acting director of the Office of Personnel Management, appear for in-person testimony by March 13th in a case involving mass terminations of federal employees. The deadline was specific, the order was clear. The administration did not produce Eisel. The refusal to comply with a testimony order is particularly significant because it prevents courts from obtaining information needed to evaluate the administration's conduct. The defiance is not just about policy outcomes, it's about preventing judicial oversight entirely. And the injunctions against freezing federal assistance that the administration allegedly ignored represent a systematic pattern rather than isolated incidents. Multiple courts issued injunctions. Multiple injunctions were ignored. The pattern suggests deliberate strategy. A decision at some level of the administration that court orders would not be treated as binding. Now let me show you what legal experts are saying about this because the analysis is damning. The Brennan Center points out that Trump administration may not like these legal rulings. They can certainly fight them in court. There's a lot of avenues to do that, but they can't ignore them. And when asked what happens if they do, experts say it's an open question how a judge might enforce a contempt order in that case. One judge basically gave them a warning saying, "I meant what I said when I told you to release those federal funds. Please follow my order." But the judge didn't mention what comes next if they continue to refuse. And that's the problem. Courts have limited enforcement mechanisms. They can hold officials in contempt. They can impose fines. They can theoretically order arrests. But practical enforcement against a sitting administration is complicated. The executive branch controls the marshals who would enforce court orders. The paradox is that enforcing orders against the executive requires the executive's cooperation, which is exactly what is being denied. Now let me explain what makes House Resolution 353 so important, because it provides the formal legal framework for the impeachment push. The 7 articles cover a range of alleged misconduct, but the court defiance elements are central. The resolution cites acting in contempt of court for violating a court-sanctioned settlement agreement. It accuses Trump of undermining the powers of Article 3 courts. The framing places the impeachment argument in constitutional terms. This is not policy disagreement, but assault on the judicial branch's constitutional role. And the obstruction of justice article connects court defiance to a broader pattern of interference with legal processes. Obstruction is familiar grounds for impeachment. It was central to both Nixon's near impeachment and Clinton's actual impeachment. The article argues that refusing to comply with court orders constitutes obstruction because it prevents courts from fulfilling their constitutional function. The connection between court defiance and obstruction provides a legal framework that voters and lawmakers can understand based on precedent. Now, here's what the December 11th vote reveals about the political dynamics. 237 votes to table means the resolution was killed, at least for now. The 140 votes against tabling means a significant number of members wanted the impeachment to proceed. The 47 Democrats who voted present rather than yes or no reveal the internal division. Present is a procedural dodge, a way to avoid taking a clear position. The dodge suggests those members see political risk in both supporting and opposing impeachment at this moment. And the Democratic division on impeachment strategy reflects competing calculations about political benefit and risk. Some Democrats believe impeachment is constitutional duty regardless of political consequences. That documented court defiance requires response whether or not that response is popular. Others worry that impeachment will energize Trump's base, that voters experiencing impeachment fatigue after two previous impeachments will punish Democrats for pursuing a third. The division prevents unified Democratic strategy and gives Republicans ammunition to claim impeachment is politically motivated rather than constitutionally required. Now let me show you what the Republican response has been, because it's unified resistance. Republicans voted to table Green's resolution. They characterize impeachment efforts as partisan overreach. They defend the administration's conduct as legitimate exercise of executive authority. The unified Republican opposition means impeachment cannot succeed in the current Congress. The votes are not there, but the documentation of court defiance continues regardless of whether impeachment proceeds. The record is being built for future action, even if present action is blocked. Now here's what creates the constitutional crisis that court defiance represents. The Constitution creates three branches with checks on each other. The judicial check on the executive depends on the executive complying with court orders. If the executive simply ignores orders, the judicial check fails. The system works only because presidents have historically respected judicial authority even when they disagreed with specific rulings. Trump's alleged defiance tests whether that respect is constitutionally required or merely traditional, and what happens when tradition is abandoned. The separation of powers argument that impeachment advocates make centers on Congress's role as ultimate check when other checks fail. If courts cannot enforce their orders, Congress can impeach. The impeachment power exists precisely for situations where a president places himself above the law. The argument is that court defiance is itself an impeachable offense, that a president who ignores judicial authority has committed the kind of high crime the framers contemplated. The argument connects specific instances of defiance to the constitutional framework for removal, and the above-the-law framing that appears throughout impeachment advocacy captures the core accusation. The phrase resonates because it encapsulates what is alleged: a president who believes legal constraints do not apply to him. No one is above the law is a foundational American principle. If Trump is above the law, if he can ignore court orders without consequence, then the principle is empty. The framing forces voters to consider whether they want a president who treats himself as exempt from legal requirements that bind everyone else. Now let me explain what makes the pattern across multiple courts so significant. One order ignored might be a dispute about scope or interpretation. Multiple orders ignored across multiple courts suggests a policy of defiance. The pattern is what transforms individual instances into constitutional crisis. The administration has apparently decided that court orders will not be treated as binding. The decision represents fundamental rejection of judicial authority, and the rhetorical attacks on judges that accompany the practical defiance create an atmosphere where defiance seems justified to supporters. Trump has called judges corrupt. He's questioned their legitimacy. He's suggested they should be impeached for ruling against him. The rhetorical attacks create an atmosphere where defiance seems justified. If judges are corrupt, then their orders need not be respected. The combination of rhetorical delegitimization and practical defiance represents a comprehensive assault on judicial authority. Now here's what makes the documentation being created so important. Each order defied is documented. Each instance of non-compliance is recorded. The judicial record accumulates whether or not Congress acts. Future historians, future prosecutors, future voters will have access to what courts found. The documentation is permanent even if immediate consequences are not imposed. The record being built now shapes how this period will be understood, and legal scholars are warning about the consequences of normalized defiance. If Trump can ignore court orders without removal, future presidents will learn that lesson. The precedent being established is that defiance works, that courts can be ignored, that the judicial check on the executive is ineffective. The concern is not just about Trump, but about what Trump's success teaches successors. Institutional damage extends beyond any individual president. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because we're going to keep tracking this impeachment firestorm. We're going to keep documenting every instance of court defiance. We're going to keep following the constitutional crisis as it develops, because what's happening right now is unprecedented. The administration is allegedly holding back $2 billion in aid defying court orders. Officials are refusing to produce testimony by judicial deadlines. House Resolution 353 impeaches on 7 articles including tyranny and contempt of court. The December vote tabled Al Green's Resolution 237 to 140, with 47 Democrats voting present. The political will for impeachment is uncertain, even as documentation of defiance accumulates. And here's what makes this a collapse for Trump. It's not a sudden dramatic fall. It's accumulating pressure from multiple directions. Courts document non-compliance. Advocates demand impeachment. Congress is divided on response. The accumulation creates mounting crisis, even if no single moment produces removal. Each documented instance of defiance adds to the case against him. Each impeachment article filed adds to the political pressure. The collapse is gradual rather than sudden, but the direction is clear. And the court defiance at the center of the impeachment push represents a constitutional violation, regardless of whether impeachment succeeds. The Constitution requires the executive to comply with judicial orders. Non-compliance is not a policy choice. It is constitutional violation. The violation exists whether or not Congress acts on it. The documentation ensures the violation is recorded for history. Trump may escape immediate consequence. He cannot escape the record of what he did. Share this video with everyone you know because people need to understand what's happening. Trump is allegedly ignoring federal court orders. Courts are documenting the defiance but cannot enforce against an executive that controls enforcement mechanisms. The constitutional crisis deepens as documentation accumulates and consequences do not follow. The tyranny charge invokes founding principles. Separation of powers was designed to prevent exactly what is alleged. The pattern across multiple courts establishes systematic defiance rather than isolated dispute. The precedent, if defiance succeeds, teaches future presidents that courts can be ignored. The above-the-law narrative captures the core concern. If Trump is above the law, then law means nothing. The documentation being created ensures the record exists for future accountability, even if present accountability fails. And here's the fundamental question voters face. Do they want a president who treats court orders as optional? The question is not partisan. It goes to the fundamental nature of the legal system. Courts issue orders. People must comply. If the president need not comply, why should anyone? The principle of law applies equally, or it does not apply at all. Voters must decide whether to enforce that principle through their votes if Congress will not enforce it through impeachment. The impeachment mechanism exists because the founders knew removal would sometimes be necessary. They created a process for it. They gave Congress the power. The power exists to be used when circumstances require. Impeachment advocates argue current circumstances require use. Opponents argue circumstances do not meet the threshold. The debate is what the founders intended, deliberation about whether conduct warrants removal. The deliberation is happening even if the conclusion is disputed. And the separation of powers that court defiance violates is the structural foundation of American government. The branches are separate so they can check each other. The checks require each branch to respect the other's authority. When the executive ignores judicial authority, the structure is compromised. When Congress does not respond to the executive ignoring judicial authority, the compromise is complete. All 3 branches must fulfill their roles for the system to work. The current situation shows what happens when they do not. The bottom line is this: Trump is collapsing as court defiance sparks a new impeachment firestorm that tests whether any check on presidential power actually works. The administration is ignoring multiple federal court orders, holding back $2 billion in foreign aid defying rulings, refusing to produce officials for court-ordered testimony. Free Speech for People announced new grounds for impeachment based on the pattern of refusing to comply. House Resolution 353 impeaches Trump on 7 articles including tyranny and contempt of court. The December vote revealed a party split with 47 Democrats voting present. Republican unity ensures impeachment cannot succeed in the current Congress, but courts can document defiance even if they cannot enforce. The constitutional crisis deepens as documentation accumulates and consequences do not follow. The tyranny charge invokes founding principles that separation of powers was designed to prevent. The pattern establishes systematic defiance. The precedent teaches future presidents that courts can be ignored. The above-the-law narrative captures the core concern. The documentation ensures the record exists for future accountability. The voter question is whether they want a president who treats court orders as optional. The fundamental question is whether constitutional constraints are real or merely traditional. The experiment is underway. The outcome will determine whether American government as designed actually works. This is Trump's collapse. Not sudden, but accumulating. Court by court, order by order, documentation by documentation. The pressure building, the crisis deepening, the constitutional system being tested, and the question remaining, will there be consequences, or will defiance become the new normal? This story continues. Stay tuned.